Pattaya City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
Billboard, big.
Good morning. Yeah, the MBE was 2006, by the way, in case anyone thought it was recent. Well, considering the media has had a big effect on my life over the last 30 years, I've lived in Pattaya, it's surprising how little the media had an effect on me in the first 30 years of my life. In fact, only 2 occasions did I come into touch with the media seriously in my youth, if I can remember that far back. And one of them was at the school I attended. I'm afraid I wasn't shown how to do this, so I'm not clear which bit to press. There's all sorts of... Or can somebody do it? Oh. You do it. I'll just tell you when to do it. 1. There we go. So at the age of 16, at Combe Grammar School in Lancashire, there's a lovely picture of it, although it doesn't show you that at the back in the 1950s was an assortment of huts where we were actually taught, rather than in this rather glamorous building. And I was the editor of the school magazine at age 16. My first introduction to the media. And this involved giving to the head teacher the copy that we wanted to use, and he either threw it in the waste paper basket or changed it beyond all recognition. This taught me the concept of the gatekeeper in the media. There's somebody somewhere decides whether you can see, hear, watch, or listen to whatever you want to listen to. There's a gatekeeper here today. His name's Peter Malhotra, over there from the Pattaya Mail. Now, the interesting thing is, today, with the social media, is the concept of the gatekeeper still there? I'll leave that with you for the moment to ponder. My second involvement with the media was in 1983, when I found myself in the Caribbean Republic of Haiti, and I happened to be there at the same time that Pope John Paul II was visiting. And the Haitian minister responsible asked me to prepare the press releases for the Pope's visit before and after. And this taught me the concept of propaganda in the media, because the Haitian government wanted to suggest that the Pope was delighted with his visit to Haiti, then ruled by Baby Doc Duvalier, and of course the rest of the world and the Pope were fairly disgusted by what they saw in Haiti, with the lack of civil rights, the poverty, and so on. So propaganda in the media was given to me as a lesson then. I can't resist telling you, by the way, that those of you who worry about the 90-day reporting to the immigration should ponder that in Haiti in those days we had to report every week, Monday morning, to the Tonton Macoute, who were the sort of private police at the time, and I had to report to a very attractive lady called Rosalie Bosquet. Could we have number 2 slide, please? And here she is. There she is. That's Rosalie Bosquet, head of the secret police, to whom we reported. So whenever people complain now about going to the immigration every 90 days, you'll understand why I'm a bit blasé about it. Okay, moving forward to 1992, when I came to live in Thailand, there was no media worth speaking of, no newspapers worth speaking of, no TV, no radio, no anything really. People mainly, if they wanted to get the word out, would either give you a leaflet or a handout, or if they had a house to sell, they would pin the notice or hammer the notice into the nearest tree trunk, and that was the media. Incidentally, that hasn't altogether died out, has it? You can still find remnants of that concept of the media still around. In 1993, however, as we heard earlier, the Pattaya Mail opened up, and it's been in existence ever since. Its purpose, I think, at the beginning, as the first newspaper and the longest lasting, was to act as a spokesperson for Pattaya, which was then under a lot of ridicule from the international media, particularly the Sunday press in England, the News of the World and so on, later defunct. Peter Malhotra and his colleagues, I wasn't involved then, were very keen to present a media which would not be just full of the kind of media sensationalism which was then very common. In an attempt to make the Pattaya Mail different from what people expected, no go-go bars were allowed to advertise. That's quite an interesting idea, because the other media were quite happy to do that. And on the whole, crime was limited to page 5. There was an attempt to give the idea that there was much more to Pattaya than just simply sensationalism. Could we have slide number 3, please? And there you see the first edition ever of the Pattaya Mail in July 1993. It's quite interesting that on the right-hand side it has the story about Utapao airport being made available to public ownership. What we didn't know at the time, in 1993, it would take another 20 years more or less for that to happen, but that's Pattaya, it often moves quite slowly. People often say that the Pattaya Mail's changed over the years, but actually I think it's remained remarkably similar. And it is quite interesting that some of the columns in the early editions, like Harry Flashman, the photographer, Ian Corness's Dear Hillary and Grapevine, and one or two others I can't remember, were there in the early issues. I don't say number 1. So there's been a continuity about the Pattaya Mail, I think, for which it should be given due credit. Having said that, crime was important in the 90s as it is now. And in 1995, there was a very stimulating headline. Number 4, please. The tourist drugging. Do you remember those stories? Some older ones amongst you? It was the idea that if a tourist went with a prostitute, if he was foolish enough to touch her breasts with his mouth, 10 minutes later he'd be on the floor asleep, and he would wake up some hours later with his trousers back on and his wallet missing. And this story, which was the headline in the Pattaya Mail at the time, reverberated all around the world. I often wonder, though, what happened. You never hear these days of people licking in the wrong place and then falling ill. So what's happened? Is the price of opium derivatives gone high? Or, as some people believe, there's no longer any prostitution in Pattaya anyway, so who would want to bother, you know? Another possibility there for you. It's called the nipple story. Even though the Pattaya Mail had a monopoly, more or less, for some years, the international media continued their attacks on Pattaya unabated. And it wasn't only the Pattaya media, which only the international media, which attacked Pattaya. They usually picked on individuals who couldn't defend themselves. The only man who ever, investigative journalist, who ever was prepared to take on the various mafias that were around at the time, property companies cheating people of their deposits, foreigners ripping off other foreigners, was actually the controversial Andrew Drummond. And whatever you make of Andrew, fair enough, but at least he had the guts, which no one else did, sometimes to take on some pretty dangerous opponents. I think he's now in England, so far as I know. Even the non-obvious press were also active in the 1990s, attacking Pattaya. Do you remember the consumer magazine Which? Which, you remember that? Well, there was a story in Which in 1997 that said Pattaya was one of the worst 10 destinations in the world. It picked up, oddly enough, traffic jams. I mean, if they'd been around now, what would they say? environmental pollution in 1997, and also far too many transvestites. And there was a helpful diagram in the Witch magazine that showed a picture of what might have been a transvestite with a finger pointing at her throat. And it said, this is how you tell a transvestite from a real woman, because if there's an apple there, there'll surely lower down be a banana. And that was in the Witch magazine in 1997. The 90s were also important for the immigration. We're not primarily concerned with the immigration today, but it crops up here and there. The 1992, I think, showed the introduction of these retirement visas. My goodness me, you could actually stay here for a year if you knew what to do. The problem was no one knew what to do. There were no expat clubs. The immigration never publicised anything, still doesn't on the whole. And there was no media much in 92 to tell people. It was all very secretive. A bit like going in Spinny's supermarket and seeing a bottle of milk and ringing up your friends to say, there's milk in Pinny's supermarket. It was all so different then, as many of you I'm sure will remember. So the immigration had the rule for retirement visas. I just point out that the minimum deposit in the bank wasn't 800,000 then. It was any six-figure sum. So 100,000 would crack it. Those were the days, eh? As we move to the year 2000 and the first decade of this century, I think you can say the early years of the 21st century were Pattia's golden years in many ways, if only because it was very easy to make money. There were newspapers all over the place, not only the Pattia Mail, Pattia Today, Pattia People, Pattia Times, and even occasionally a periodical called the Pattia Sun, which never made much impact as it was often printed upside down. And these newspapers had a field day and were pretty profitable, all of them, because the property companies, and this was the main reason, who were expanding dramatically at the time, didn't really have the internet to advertise on. So it was mainly the print media in the early days that publicised the many, many projects, some of you probably live in them, that began at that time and of course continue until the present time. So it was the flourishing of the media, all types, in the early part of this century. Radio stations, I can't remember them all, TV programs like TV news stations like Howard Miller's Pattia City News, you remember that? All sorts of things that are now only just a memory, all over the place. And Pattia boomed, according to the official figures, 800,000 Brits, 800,000 Brits visited Thailand, not necessarily Pattia, so you can knock it down by half if you want. 800,000 Brits visited Thailand every year. I never believed it. I used to get a lot of trouble in the embassy arguing with them about that figure which they publicised, because I worked for the embassy at the time, because I realised that the figures were inflated, because I counted as 6 tourists, because I came in and out of the country, because I had commitments in Cambodia at the time, 6 times. So every time you came in, you counted as an extra. Plus the fact it included, you know, all the Hong Kong nationals without right of abode in the UK. So the data always in Thailand on who's coming and why they're coming and how long they're here is extremely soft. Nonetheless, we all know that it was incredibly busy period, mainly expats from Europe, Australia, America, some from the Middle East, and the beginnings of the Russians, of course, when the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. They really were the boom years, and the media represented that quite well. But what impressed me when I was preparing this little talk was how many of the media news at the time were stories that have reverberate to this day. Number 5, please. Oh, that's number 5, is it? Okay. What's that? Sorry, world with the number 6, please. Yeah. At the time, it seemed to me, many of the stories reverberate to this day. That was in 2002, I think, Maprichan Reservoir down. You know, I seem to have read about that in the last couple of years, haven't you too? You know, Maprichan Lake, up and down. That's a good example of how the stories kept going. Next one, please. Every 2 years or so, the local authority promises to improve the ways and wherefores for the handicapped, improve the roads. This is a story from the early 20th century, 21st century, which is still, I think, ongoing. It's another one. And there are many more of them. Just one more, I think. The next one. I seem to have heard that story recently. I mean, if that was in the Pattaya Mail this week, you would think, oh, that's news. That's actually from 2001 or 2, or whenever it was, spending money on the beach. You know, how much money's been spent on the beaches in Pattaya over the last few years? Goodness only knows. Okay. So these were the boom years. Now, from around about 2010, you could argue about the years, certainly, Pattaya began to change quite dramatically. Of course, it's always been changing, but in quite a radical sense. And the attempts to change Pattaya, I think, came mainly from the Thai government, especially from the military coup of 2014, but even before then, under Miss Shinawatra, not Taksin, there were attempts to do it, attempts to show that we must improve the environment in Pattaya. We must try to dissuade the reputation it had for prostitution and things like that. And these visions have been semi-successful. There is a bit of a different image about Pattaya, which goes back to those days. What about mice, for example? You heard of mice, other than running around your kitchen? Meetings, incentives, conferences, exhibitions. How does an impact in Pattaya? The five-star hotels have benefited terrifically from those kind of initiatives. You can even hire a catamaran to go up and down the bay if you're launching a book or something like that. Not to mention the Indian weddings, which are fantastic events for which Pattaya is very popular. 300 people all arriving together on the same aircraft, staying for 4 or 5 days for an Indian wedding. And one of the rules is there must be an elephant and there must be the buffet 24 hours all the time. You know, they're incredible events. And so mice, which is the heading for all this kind of stuff, certainly had an impact. I don't think there's any doubt. Certainly the EEC, the Eastern Economic Corridor, which is a funding agency, as some of you know, because you've had a talk here on it, I think, funding agency, international funding agency of Thai corporations and foreign corporations. And this has been responsible for many of the improvements that you see around Pattaya, the road building, the ring roads, the extensions to the motorway, the beach reclamation, although that's not been as successful, has it? And the enormous changes has been at the Bali High Pier. These kind of things are not the Thai government deciding to fund, and certainly not City Hall, which has only a peanuts budget, couldn't possibly do all that. It's international funding. And the question you have to ask yourself is, this international funding, is it there to help bachelors find the nightclubs easier and go home? No, it's not. It's obviously to do with new markets, that a lot of confidence that international investors have in Pattaya. To some of us it seems overconfident, but there are people around who believe the future of the whole province is in high-tech industries of one sort and another, for which you can see many in Rayong and visit the deep water ports in Maprichan and Lamshabang, and you begin to see that outside the little world we live in, you know, going for the best breakfast in Pattaya on soy bacao and so on, there's a much bigger world out there, or the best fish and chips, to quote me in the Pattaya Mail the other day. There's a much bigger world out there going on, which we must give full credit to. The media on the whole, on the TV, and the many internet media channels there are now. You know, some good ones. Tiger, I read every day, and PBS, and there are some others, you know, on the internet, the news. Patia Mail also has a good internet edition. They're showing, they do mention the EEC, but there's not a lot of publicity to it, considering it's been the main agent of change, particularly for the last 6 or 7 years. The EEC was set up by the Prime Minister under Section 64 of the Constitution, allowed him to bypass parliamentary approval, and it's only quite a recent phenomenon. We've also seen in this time the decline of the print media, of course. As I said earlier, Patia Mail is the only one left of the print media, and we can alternatively look for loads of information about Patia on the internet, as many of you know. So Patia was changing, and then suddenly in February 2016 it received a very nasty shock which had reverberations far and beyond the actual event. Could we have the next one, please? Oh, has it gone? Okay. Well, it was the Bridge Club raid, of which I had a rather... There it is, yeah. In February 2016, the Bridge Club, which... Oh, there are two Bridge Clubs, actually, but without going into technicalities, one of the Bridge Club I set up in 1994, sorry, which I was fully licensed and was affiliated to the Bangkok Bridge Federation. Many of the police knew all about it, no problem at all. And then suddenly, some army people arrived in the venue we then had, which was a restaurant, with AK-47 rifles or machine guns, together with the Department of Provincial Administration, DOPA, which is the civilian licensing authority in Naklua. One of the many myths about that is that it was something to do with the police. It had nothing to do with the police. It was a concerned citizen who went to the police with complaints about gambling and was told to clear off because the police knew that there was no gambling. And so she went to the civilian licensing officer, and this is what happened. It's gone off again, but anyway, you saw it. I carefully chose a photo where I wasn't in it, by the way. There were 30 people arrested on that day. There should have been 32, but 2 very cleverly hid in the toilet and escaped detention, which they were very grateful for. Okay. Looks like we've lost the rest of the pictures. So it all ended, the Bridge Club scandal, without... We were released after 10 hours. The average age was 76. There were 2 ladies in the 90s, all that kind of thing. But of course it reverberated all around the world in a way that the EEC or putting opium on your tits or whatever had no effect compared with this. I mean, it was remarkable. Most of the countries of the EU, which then included Britain, were included. I myself and other people as well suffered quite a lot of publicity. The Sunday Telegraph had the headline of me, former vice consul arrested in Patia for gambling, and so on, all that. But at the end of the day, nothing happened. We were released after 10 hours, and the case was referred to the governor. It's a provincial governor of Chonburi. It's not commonly known that the police and the army under the military constitution have equal rights to arrest people. But where there's a dispute between the of any kind about whether a prosecution should proceed, and there certainly was a doubt over with this prosecution, it's referred to the governor for a decision, who sat on it for a couple of years, but eventually I got my deposit back, you'll be glad to know. So it's all over. It's amazing what these things throw up if you have dealings with the law. The main problem seemed to be in the prosecution the Japanese Occupation Act of 1942, which not many people have heard of. This apparently said if there were more than 2 packs of cards in a room, naughty goings-on were occurring, as the Japanese at the time were trying to improve the morale of the Bangkok citizens. You remember Thailand sort of semi-had Japanese influence in World War II. An interesting story whose publicity far outmatched anything else. If Pattaya was ever famous for 15 minutes, as Andy Warhol said, I think that was the 15 minutes when the army arrived at the Bridge Club. This was followed, of course, by COVID. We don't seem to have that. I had a couple of media headings for you from COVID, but you all know about it anyway, and the effect it's had on Pattaya has been quite traumatic, although it does appear that seems to be clearing a bit. Certainly I spent a fish and chip evening the other night in Tree Tops, Soi Buakhao. I mean, if you've not been there, it's just amazing, you know, it really is remarkable, and it's full of people like you and me. Well, what about the future? The future for Pattaya? Well, your guess is as good as mine. I think it wouldn't be a good idea, sorry Peter, to offer to buy newspapers at the moment, or TV stations, or even radio, because even with radio they're changing the way in which provincially licenses are given out. So the traditional media that we all know and love, I think it doesn't have a bright future, although of course some of it will survive, but the consumer will decide. Basically the whole of life is moving towards your mobile phone. I think you know that. It's going to change a lot over the next few years. Artificial intelligence, AI, hasn't really had the impact yet, but it's going to have. And so there's all that coming ahead. New markets are happening all the time. My last slide would have been to show you the new medical city. It's not a new hospital, it's a medical city that's going to, oh, here we go. Okay, well, we've gone back a bit now. That was one of the headings of the ghost town status. You know all that. In the next one, please. Oh, this is the one I want you to look at. This is the last one. This is a drawing, an impression of what medical city will look like, but you can already see the land is being dug up and processed by Maprichan Lake, which is in the distance. It'll be 1 million square meters, 566 rai, and it's going to be the most up-to-date medical facility, perhaps even in Asia. Funded, of course, by the EEC and other contributors, such as American universities. It's going to be incredible. Chosen in this location because it's near motorways and all that sort of thing, and there isn't much land left in Pattaya. So it's not in Pattaya, it's in the Nong Pru local authority, and it's going to be initially opened in, I think, 2024, probably it'll be 2025 or 6, since they always go behind. Now, this high-tech medical city is full of the Internet of Things. Artificial intelligence is going to be important. You know, at the moment you've got to speak to a doctor, but you've been already, and in the future you just feed your data into a machine and it'll tell you how long you have to live or what you should do about it. You know, it's only just beginning the kind of high-tech implications for all of us. Now, this medical city, why has it been built, or why is it being built, I should say? Is it because you and I, you know, in our old age, want to go and live there? No, it's to do with medical tourism. It's to make money, and there's fantastic money to be made in medical tourism. 2 million, they say, people already come to Pattaya largely for that reason, and this is going to be centre. It's going to have an old people's home anyway, but I doubt you'll be able to cover it by a small pension, and it's going to have accommodation for doctors and nurses, absolutely everything. Quite remarkable. And so this, I think, sums up really better than anything the future that probably Pattaya has. Now, where does the media fit into all that? Well, it's difficult to say. I think all I can say in conclusion to you is that the history of the media and the changes in Pattaya over the last 30 years have been pretty significant, but they tell you nothing, I think, about the changes and perceptions in the media over the next 30 years. And so I look forward to seeing you all again in the year 2052, when we'll be able to see for ourselves. Thank you. Okay, if you have any questions, it's okay. Comments?
Hello. Very
Hello.
fantastic, interesting talk. Brought me back to 1992 when I came here.
Ah, very good.
And it was paradise. I think it was about 9 baht for a litre of petrol. My money, a pound, was 85 baht to the pound. In fact, as I just got home after about 4 weeks here for a rest, my friend rang me up about 3 o'clock in the morning and said, John, I thought he'd had an accident. And he said, no, he said, send some money over. It's gone to 96 baht to the pound. Paradise. And you brought back all those memories. Unfortunately, now we're suffering because it's difficult for a lot of people, especially on fixed incomes. But that's life. But thank you for that, Barry.
Welcome. Yes, I'm lucky actually. I had a premium bond win the other day at £25. Okay, I'm just going to get a chair since I'm a very old guy and I'm going to sit down. Bring it up here. Thank you for that. Petrol, I think, was 8 baht, I seem to remember, not 9, but it was remarkable. Diesel.
Thank you very much for your very good talk. Anthony Laporte is me. I caught part of your article about the fish and chips. Could you give me, or give us, more information as to the origin of the fish, whether it's local, imported, frozen, fresh, etc., and which, in your opinion, is the best to use?
Well, you might catch no expert on fish and chips apart from eating them, but the first one was in 1992 or 3. There is some dispute. I had a discussion with my friend Keith Fort in the Caddyshack the other day, and he disputes the name I gave, so I won't give it publicly, but there was one in 1992, but it was a local fish, what's often called John Dory, but isn't really John Dory. It's a cheap Pacific fish, which is fairly tasteless. The importing of fish, as you say, really, to make it at all a reasonable price, depends now on the sort of technologies there are that allow them to bring it in. But the first time I ever had cod and chips, and it was real cod, was about the year 2000. I don't recall before then there being foreign fish imported. And to me, there's nothing better than Atlantic cod, so I put my name firmly on that. All of them can provide it now because the import of it's fairly easy, and the new technology and the special aircraft coming over and so on. So both the places I reviewed or talked about in the article to which you refer the other day in the Patio Mail, and all the others can offer genuine European cod. But they don't always tell you in some places. If you can't taste it, then it's probably Pacific Dory.
Yeah, Barry. One paper very interestingly named The Walking Street Journal, Alan Verstein.
Oh, yes. Great Walking Street Journal. There were some lovely articles in that. I loved it. Thank you for reminding me.
That only lasted a very short time, didn't it? How long? A couple of years, maybe?
I think about 3 or 4. It was devoted to, it was a kind of propaganda item for the locality of the walking street in its heyday. I think what killed it off was the decline of the walking street. You know, it's often said that COVID killed the walking street, but it's not. It was declining before then. You know, there were for sale notices going up and the numbers were dropping of people and so on. So I think it was perhaps linked to the changes in the walking street, less sex. You know, all the shows, ladies with goldfish and ping pong balls. I wouldn't dream of telling you anymore, it might corrupt you. That was dying out, and the walking street change became much more amber light rather than red.
Hi Barry, I remember many years ago having a massage, and you beside me, and you were having a massage as well, and you were telling me some of your lovely stories. And
was I drunk?
No, you were saying about a guy when you weren't for the consulate that he, like all of us, was excited to come to Pattaya for his holiday, and he dumped his case, stripped into the hotel, dumped it, and out into the bars. Yippee! And then he forgot where he was, where was his hotel, where he was, and you. I always remember you telling them. I bet you've got stacks of those lovely stories.
I have. I did write a book, of course, in 2013. It was a hurried book to meet the publisher's deadline, too short, but a couple of the stories are in there. I think my favourite story of all, incidentally, that man who was lost, you know, the name of the hotel he was at was the Silver Plate. And he could remember there was a precious metal in the title. That's all he could remember. But my favourite story is actually the lady whose husband died here, and she took the corpse back to England without it being cremated here. And in the customs shed at Heathrow, they said, what's all this on top of the coffin? There was a sort of, you know, a bag, and inside there were 200 cigarettes and a bottle of whiskey. And she said, well, he's entitled to his duty-free allowance. And when they said it was expensive to take the body back to England, she said, well, he had a return ticket.
Any more questions from Barry? It's the shy and retiring Big Ron, who does not need a mic.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. I hear you mention that name prostitute a lot. How can I go find a handsome guy like me? How can I go find some of that?
I'm afraid I'm not an expert on that. I don't feel the need to pay for it.
We're all done. Well, many thanks. Big round of applause to Barry for a wonderful talk. I told him he had to ask a question, but it took him this long to think of one. A wonderful friend of the club, Peter Malhotra, for Time Mail.
It's not a question, really.
Well, go away.
I just want to say thank you, Barry. There was a beautiful presentation, and fortunately, we are still in existence, so Pattaya Mail was up there on the screen most of the time, and you almost got the whole history. I mean, when I say almost, I don't mean it that way. It would take hours to even tell the story, but you put it all in a nutshell, how we started and how we're here, and how we have been working to be with this community for now 30 years almost. We will remain to be so. It's a difficult time, and we don't know how long we will be able to go on, but we will keep trying. And according to history of the world, nothing to do with Mel Brooks, history of the world, history of the media, it says that every community must have a newspaper. If there is not a newspaper anymore in Pattaya, we, us that are at this age, would be lost. We can't let that happen. And therefore, this is the aim of me, is to carry on doing this. And I must say that Barry has written for other papers and other media before, but we've been friends for the last 30 years at least, during the time that he was a consul and everything else that he did around here. And when he started to contribute to the Pattaya Mail again, it brought back life to the Pattaya Mail. He is so well versed in practically every matter. I mean, he's older than I am, he's older than most of us, so he's gone through life quite a bit. Don't mind me if I'm telling you the story, I'll just be finished in a second. But I just want to say that Barry has brought back life, has brought back knowledge, has brought back the old traditional media, and that's the right word to use, the traditional media where all of us enjoy. We like to read news, we like to read news with information, with some background and some history to it. And this is what Barry has been doing for us. And I must say thank you, Barry, for being with Pattaya Mail and carry on doing this. You're only 81 now? 80? 2? 3? 80. Only 80, yeah? Oh, you're still young then. Well, I'll still be with the paper for the next 10 years, and I hope you're still with us, and most of you too. Thank you very much, and thank you for your support for the Patio Mail. Thank you.
Right. Don't go. Come back. Come back. Barry, come back.
No, I don't really have a question. I just have some comments. First of all, I came to Thailand in 1986 on my first trip, moved here in 2002, and I found the Patio Mail to be quite good. But the Patio Mail, we have a very good association with our club because we provide, and now I write the article, summarizes our meetings, which I send to the Patio Mail, and they do publish. But I did want to mention, because it hadn't been mentioned, they're talking about the print media, the Patio Mail does have an online place, so just Google it, Patio Mail, and you can read articles and so forth on the online. And I find it, just for my own personal benefit, when we have a repeat speaker to the club, and I'm trying to do the background information to put in our newsletter, I often go to the Patio Mail online and type their name into the search feature, and up comes the article that was written when they last presented, which has a lot of times the background information, or at least tells me the date so I can go back and look at some other information. But I do appreciate the Patio Mail very much. They also provide us a free copy of their newspaper at our meetings. So I think we owe a big hand to the Patio Mail.
Barry, come back up. Got a little memento for you, Barry. Well said, Daryl. And if you're not, get on the Patio Mail emailing list. They send it out every day, and you can click on the articles, and there's usually, if not every day, just about every day, one by Barry Kenyon that is certainly worth clicking on. And I think this talk was really worth clicking on. I think it was really, really good. Well done. And it was funny in places too, wasn't it? And I always remember